everyone. As you can see by my crown, we are going to be diving into another Disney princess movie. Yes, and since I'm going in order, I'm going to be talking about Sleeping Beauty. Now, you might be wondering if you happen to know, Lady and the Tramp came out before this one. However, Lady and the Tramp is not based on a novel or anything, or fairy tale or story, so I couldn't really necessarily do that one. So I am skipping it and moving on right into the next film that came out, which was Sleeping Beauty. So it pretty much everything that I have reviewed from Ichabod to Mr. Toad up to Peter Pan was not skipping anything over. But this I am skipping Lady and the Tramp because it's not based on anything. And from the research that I've done, it basically just says, yeah, it's just a story, but not a story based off of something. So, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to skip it and move on to Sleeping Beauty. Now, Sleeping Beauty, you have to understand, is a lot different in the Disney version than in the original source material, and I have the original source material right here. And basically, it's the same guy who did Cinderella, Charles Berthollet. That's basically the one that Disney said that they were trying to base their story off of, but they go in fairly different directions as far as plot-wise, and for the most part, maybe some character things, but for the most part, it really just is trying to tell a story, but fairly differently. So without further ado, let's get into these interesting details that I was able to find that are sometimes fairly similar, but then others that are way off. So the Disney version sort of opens up similarly to the original tale. There's this couple who really wants a kid, but they can't seem to get one, and then they finally get one, and it's happy and merry and happy, and it's a king and a queen, and the kingdom sort of rejoices and is happy, and basically during the christening of this child, all the fairies were sort of invited to come. Now, these fairies include 7 total. 7 total fairies. And they were invited to be godmothers to the little princess, which is sort of interesting because I don't think really the Disney version specifies them to be necessarily godmothers, but I guess you could put it sort of similarly. Especially since this is the same guy who did Cinderella, so it would kind of make sense that he would go with this sort of same formula. And this is where we get some sort of coherence with the Disney version, because in the Disney version there are only 3 fairies, not 7. And basically they come in order to sort of celebrate the child sort of being born. I don't really think that they specified as a christening, but again, that could maybe be possible. But for the most part, in the Disney version, the fairies are played out fairly similar in the fact that they are supposed to bestow gifts onto the princess, like give her certain traits or aspects that allow her to somehow be perfect in a way. In particular, there's 2 fairies who bestow one in the Disney version. One is beauty. One bestows beauty. The other bestows the gift of song. And the third one bestows the counter curse that we see when Maleficent puts a curse on the baby princess Aurora. But basically, in the original work, it sort of plays out similarly, but within a different light. basically they sort of host this feast in the original work, and the fairies come, and what ends up happening is that Maleficent isn't really identified as so much as a witch as she is an old fairy. It basically says that just as all were sitting down to the table, an aged fairy was seen to enter, whom no one had thought to invite. The reason being that for more than 50 years she never quitted the tower in which she lived, and people had supposed her to be dead or bewitched. So basically from that, it's kind of explained as to why they wouldn't really necessarily invite her. It's like they didn't even really know of her existence. And she was fairly old and she didn't come out of her tower, so, you know, it's kind of like, you know, the neighbor that you've never talked to or spoken to and suddenly moves, and then they suddenly come into your house and suddenly expect to somehow be invited. I think it's that kind of a feeling. And so she basically just comes in and expects to somehow be invited. And that's how it kind of plays itself out. But in the Disney version, Maleficent literally sort of crashes the big gift-giving ceremony, meaning one of the fairies is actually going to bestow her gift onto Aurora, and then Maleficent shows up and basically kind of says, "Oh, you didn't invite me, huh?" And even the mom's like, "Oh, you're not offended that we didn't invite you?" And then she's like, "Oh no, I'm not really offended, but I'm gonna put a curse on your baby," and that's basically what she does. And it Disney version doesn't seem to offer like an explanation as to why they didn't invite her. I mean, it's probably self-explanatory with the way that she looks, that she would probably be threatening. But at the same time, it's not really fully fleshed out, or like given at least a little bit of an explanation like they did in the original work. But for the most part, it's fairly it's fairly loose, her sort of motivations and things of that nature. But the original work continues with when the king orders a place. By the king's orders, a place was laid for her, but it was impossible to give her a gold casket like the others, for only 7 had been made for the 7 fairies. The old creature believed she was intentionally slighted and muttered threats between her teeth. So it's fairly given that she does not feel welcome. And in the Disney version, it kind of makes sense in a way too, because she goes, "Hey, there's a baby here and everybody's celebrating. Why not am I included in this?" And doesn't really sort of, again, offer sort of a more in-depth-ish explanation, because she's supposed to be a fairy. I mean, this woman's supposed to be a fairy in the original tale, unlike Maleficent, who's this really dark kind of witch-like creature, you could say. And in the original work, she's one of the fairies. And I mean, it kind of makes sense that if you're going to invite all the fairies, you know, you would invite her too. And so I think the fairy tale's a little bit more consistent with that in that respect. Whereas in the Disney version, the motivations I think are there, but I mean, I'm personally more of a person who likes villains who have a more strong motivation. And Maleficent's motivation I always thought was just so weak. just because she just gets snubbed at a party, and really that's the revenge you're gonna go for? Oh, okay. You really are gonna cling your life onto this? And it just didn't really resonate with me so much. But again, some people may feel differently. But I think, from what I've explained to you, I think the original work does a good job of trying to establish this sort of motivation behind it by making her feel like that she is sort of supposed to be part of this kind of ceremony because she is a fairy, essentially. But in the Disney version, Maleficent feels so far removed from everybody else that it would kind of make sense that they wouldn't necessarily include her. So, again, could be interpreted various different ways. And basically, one of the fairies seems to be concerned about this bad fairy or old fairy that's supposed to technically be Maleficent. One of the good fairies is in the original tale is actually concerned that she might do something really bad or wrong. And since all the fairies are supposed to give Aurora sort of gifts, she decides to go last. And so as they're going into a line to give the fairies, one of the good fairies decides to go last, and then the second to last fairies, the old fairy or the bad fairy, or technically speaking our antagonist, or meaning Maleficent, if you want to somehow put it that way, because again that character is basically who bestows the curse. And when the fairy comes finally to bestow this curse, the curse is basically the same in the fact that she'll sleep, but it has nothing to it says that she'll just basically basically die by the spindle, and yeah, it's basically, from what I can tell, very the same. You know, she will prick her finger and she'll basically die. But I don't think, in the tale it doesn't really specify an age. In the Disney version it's made clear that Maleficent says on her 16th birthday she's gonna die. But in this version it doesn't really give a specific date. It just says, yeah, one day it's gonna happen to her and it's her fate, the end. And everybody's, as you could tell, is probably fairly frightened by this notion. And they kind of go, oh no, what do we do? But then the last fairy comes and sort of makes this counter curse, similar to the Disney version, except in the Disney version it's played out to the effect that Maleficent sort of interrupts the third fairy to bestow her gift. And then after she does this curse, the other fairy who hasn't given the chance to give her gift can give her gift to Aurora and make that gift be that she will just fall into a deep sleep. However, the Disney version sort of has a different, I think, take on it. Basically, she says that it's not going to be really like love's kiss that's going to save her. It's just a prince's son will come and he'll fall in love with her and then therefore save her. But it doesn't specify like a kiss or an act, just that he'll just show up. And then also it says in the original tale that she's gonna be asleep for 100 years. 100 years. So, yeah, basically, you might be wondering, well, why does it have to be 100 years? Why can't she just make it like so? But it doesn't offer an explanation. Again, this is fairy tale logic. You kind of have to go with what you have, and from what I have, that's pretty much how it works. In the Disney version, there's no specificity or a specific time period as to how long she'll sleep. It just says, you will be asleep until your lover comes and kisses you, and that's the end. And then you'll be alive again. And basically the effects of the curse, or the effects of trying to prevent this curse, are played out also fairly differently. In the Disney version, you have the king sort of say, hey, you know what, I'm going to burn all of the spinning wheels so that so that there's no more spindles, and that she won't prick her finger and die, or fall into a deep, deep sleep. And they also, in the Disney version, the king and queen decide, you know what, that's probably not going to be enough. Why don't we send her somewhere secluded where she won't be, where she won't have to be so far into the spotlight? Because again, that kind of would make sense. I mean, think about it. You're in a kingdom where the kingdom's basically the center of sort of the town, or the area. So it would make sense that they would send her somewhere secluded. And in doing so, the fairies in the end sort of become these really main protagonists, because they are the ones that really take care of and sort of raise the baby, instead of the king and queen. However, in the original version, they decide not to have this happen. Instead, they just keep the child, and the child grows. And instead of trying to burn spinning wheels and spindles, they just decide to instead basically have an edict that decrees that you can't have spinning wheels. Yeah. It's kind of like one of those things where, we do have laws for not stealing, but that doesn't mean that people aren't going to steal, or that they think maybe for some reason that stealing isn't wrong. I mean, you will probably have those kinds of situations. I mean, so this is what kind of ends up happening. There ends up being this sort of, I think, older woman. Basically, they call her an old serving woman. And Aurora grows, and I think she is rather 16. 15, 16. And basically, she ends up coming across this old woman, and she gets really curious about, the spinning wheel, and she wants to try. And the older woman sort of tells her, yeah, this is a spinning wheel, but then she gets just so excited, I guess, by it, because it's something that she's never been familiar with. And again, they don't tell her about this curse her whole life in the original version. They just say, yeah, you just have this curse, or yeah, no, we're not going to tell you that you have this curse, because it probably could have prevented something if they told her, but nope, I guess they did not tell her. And basically what happens is she's fiddling around with it, spinning around the spinning wheel, and then she pricks her finger, and then poof, sleep. In the Disney version, this is fairly interesting in how it plays out. You'll probably notice that throughout the time, Aurora, I think, is sort of used as a prop. For the most part, she's really not that interesting. I think she is probably the weakest Disney princess out of all the Disney princesses. I think she is the one that really is just a prop there to move, and used as more of a plot device. But basically, when she's brought back to the castle by the fairies during this particular time when they feel that her time is over, and now her time being secluded is over. Now she should come back and take responsibility and start being a princess. That's when Maleficent actually comes in. Again, the villain actually just comes in and hypnotizes her, and then in a way sort of forces her to touch a spinning wheel. So again, original version, she basically dooms herself. In the Disney version, she kind of just gets used by magic and sort of manipulated. So again, that's really how it kind of goes from there. And it has to be noted in the Disney version that as Aurora, or the princess, is being held by these fairies throughout the years and years and years on end, she actually does come across the prince beforehand. And she actually meets him, and then they have a scene together, and it's established that they like each other. But again, she's sort of forced to, again, go with the fairies, to go live a life back into the castle. So you have basically all of that chunk that is not even close to what happens in the original. And basically that's really all what happens up until the point of the from what I've explained by the differences in plot here. That's basically where each of them are as far as when she finally gets pricked, and then you get sort of into that second act where it's about sort of, resurrecting her. And basically the original tale, very different in how this plays out. It's rather interesting because in the original the fairies don't really do much. When the king and queen actually do discover that she did prick her finger. In the Disney version, they do not figure that out at all. And you'll kind of see what I mean by that as I try to explain this. But for the most part, since she's going to sleep for 100 years, basically the good queen, or the good fairy, which I think is this, it's the same one that bestowed that gift onto her that she would just sleep and not die. She basically comes back and to the kingdom as she hears about this, and she decides to put everybody to sleep. And this is the part that I think kind of gripes me a bit as to this plot. She basically, what happens is that she touched with her wand everybody except the king and queen, who was in the castle: governesses, maids of honor, ladies in waiting, gentlemen, officers, stewards, cooks, scullens, errand boys, guards, porters, pages, footmen. She touched likewise all the horses in the stables with their grooms, the big mastiffs in the courtyard, and little Puff, the pet dog of the princess, who was lying on the bed beside his mistress. The moment she had touched them, they all fell asleep, to awaken only at the same moment as their mistress. Thus they would always be ready with their service whenever she should require it. And they mean by mistress, meaning the princess. And the very spits before the fire loaded with partridges and pheasants subsided into slumber, and the fire as well. All was done in a moment, for the fairies do not take long over their work. And basically, she doesn't put to sleep the parents. Basically what happens is I'll continue reading on, but basically Then the king and queen kissed their dear child without waking her, and left the castle. Proclamations were issued forbidding any approach to it, but these warnings were not needed, for within a quarter of an hour they grew up all around the park so vast a quantity of trees, big and small, with interlacing brambles and thorns, that neither man nor beast could penetrate them. The tops alone of the castle towers could be seen, and these only from a distance. Thus did the fairy's magic contrive that the princess, during all the time of her slumber, should have naught whatever to fear from prying eyes. Okay, so basically the parents want to sort of keep her secluded, but I don't understand why the parents, who initially wanted a child, okay, they wanted a kid, they got a kid, but that kid is gonna be asleep for 100 years, and you put all of the servants, everybody else, so that she'll have somebody to wake up to. You allow that to happen, but you don't want to fall asleep yourself and wait for your child to wake up. You just want to abandon everything. Again, fairy tale logic here. I really don't understand that logic. Disney version, I think, explains itself a little bit better. Basically, what happens after she's asleep, and the fairies discover her, and Maleficent, who basically tells them, "Hey, you know what? I'm pretty much the awesome woman here. You know, you can't mess with me. Ha ha ha!" And leaves. And they cry and weep over her. The three fairies, and not just one, but the three fairies that are all within this Disney movie, decide to put everybody to sleep. And they put everybody to sleep. They put the king to sleep, they put the queen to sleep, they put everybody to sleep. And put them in the same kind of state as Aurora until she wakes up. Again, another thing that I guess should be worth noting here. And that makes more sense to me. I don't understand why the author just decided, hey, you know what, I'm not gonna put the king and queen to sleep. Nope. No, I'll just have them leave. Have them leave! Just leave. But everybody else, you know, those people that she's maybe not necessarily the most close to in her life, yeah, they can stay and sleep for 100 years. So, again, logic here is kind of not there from this standpoint. But basically, what happens after those 100 years, and how the castle becomes fairly secluded, and nobody hears about it anymore, and it's just something shrouded in mystery. What ends up happening is that there happens to be a king's son, and he happens to be on a hunt with some people. And basically they do come across this castle, or at least he does, and he kind of asks people, well, what's behind this whole place? You know, it's so abandoned, and there's nothing there. What does it mean? And again, the Disney version does emphasize sort of, you know, with the thorns and things like that. But with the Disney version, we get at least a little bit of sense of the prince beforehand, but in the original work, he's just introduced right now. And basically, an old peasant tells him that more than 50 years ago, I heard my father say that in this castle lies a princess, the most beautiful that has ever been seen. It is her doom to sleep there for 100 years, and then to be awakened by a king's son, for whose coming she awaits. So basically, after hearing this, he kind of thinks, I'm that guy. I am that guy. And so he decides to go up to the tallest tower, and he basically comes up and, trembling in his admiration, he drew near and went on his knees beside her. At that same moment, the hour of disenchantment having come, the princess awoke and bestowed upon him a look more tender than the first glance might seem to warrant. Okay, so again, since we've established that the original work does not include a kiss or any of that stuff, he basically just kind of, I guess, he just, again, sort of similar to Snow White, he just, in the original tale too, he just sees her and is totally in love with her and just falls even on his knees, and then for some reason that works and that suddenly wakes her up. So yeah, and basically that's when they really start their actual conversation. They do actually have a conversation here. It's not like she wakes up with Snow White and then the first thing that he literally asks her is, will you marry me? No. At least they have here, it seems like, a conversation. Even though that conversation isn't really displayed to you, they just kind of tell you that that conversation is there. And basically, since she wakes up, all the other servants around them wake up, and they have a big feast and all that stuff, and they get married, basically. So that's how the original works. Disney work totally played out differently. In the Disney work, it plays into the idea that Maleficent is still present here, unlike the original work, who just completely drops this antagonist that they have going in the beginning. But in the Disney version, Maleficent basically has Philip held captive, and you'll kind of see how this plays out when you watch the Disney version. But basically, she captures him, and then the fairies figure out that she is holding him, and then they go to find the prince and release him, and basically they act as like the heroes here. I mean, the fairies are really the heroes for the most part in the Disney version, it seems like. And they give Philip sort of all of these gadgets in order to fight, and I mean by gadgets, I mean just, you know, Middle Ages gadgets like a sword and shield. And they sort of say, hey, you know what, you need to show up and you need to do your job, even though we're kind of doing the work for you. And basically they give him all of this ability to do what needs to be done. And Maleficent tries to counter this, and this is where you get the Disney climax. The famous Disney climax where she changes herself completely into this dragon-like creature, and basically her and Philip have a fight to the death, and Philip defeats her, and he comes and he kisses Aurora, and then she wakes up, and then everybody wakes up, and then everybody celebrates, and that's the end of the Disney version. The original version gives us a little bit more of what happens after everything is peaceful and everybody wakes up. Kind of plays out a little bit more. And it continues. And in doing so, we kind of get sort of a different story. It's almost like these two stories are just kind of distinct, separate kinds of stories, but somehow loosely connect because they deal with the prince and the princess. And basically, in the original, the prince and the princess marry, but they marry secretly, and they have 2 kids, one being a girl named Dawn and another being Day, which is a boy. And basically, there ends up being another villain here. And the other villain is, again, a stepmother. You'll kind of see how he literally tries to copy his previous works and really tries to put them in there. But basically, it's a stepmother, and she has an ogre lineage So basically, she's an ogre somehow. um, and again, this is a stepmother, so this can't really be the prince's actual mother, but stepmother, they label it. And basically, she wants to, how do you say, she's has the liking to, I guess, kids in particular, and obviously, once the prince sort of exposes the fact that he has, hey mom, or stepmom, I'm married, and I have 2 kids now, and I have a wife. Yeah, she probably, I guess, wouldn't be maybe so warm. So she decides to sort of put them in a secluded area in the woods. And I believe that this is a secluded, I think it's it's basically a secluded house in the woods. And that's where she puts the princess and her kids. And basically, she suddenly decides, hey, I want to eat one of the kids. She decides, I believe it's the girl first, Dawn, and she asks the servant to basically kill Dawn. Yeah, please kill my grandchild for me, please, so I can eat it. And the guy just kind of goes, okay, but he doesn't really do it. Doesn't kill the child, and instead replaces it with her with a lamb. But the ogress, or stepmother, is tricked by this and totally falls for it and believes that she's actually consuming a child, and he puts like this special sauce on it so it tastes really good. And then the next time around, she wants suddenly to eat the boy, and he gives her a goat instead, because he can't bear to kill the kid. And it does say kid here, but kid is like, I think it's the, a kid, it can be still be classified as a goat, so don't think kid means, kid and like child. No. He basically replaces it with a goat, and she eats the goat. And she thinks it's so delicious, and doesn't know that the kids are taken somewhere secluded, somewhere away, so that they are not bombarded by the ogress, because again, the ogress thinks that she did actually eat them. And then she suddenly wants to eat the queen now, and basically he kind of tricks her again, because he can't bear to give up or let the queen be eaten. So it's that kind of a thing. And basically she ends up discovering this trick, that she was tricked by her servant, and the prince, or technically speaking king, because the father did die, so now he's coined as king now, who saved the princess. He comes and discovers that she's making this this tub in the courtyard filled with vipes and other noxious creatures. He sort of discovers what she's doing, and basically, since she's discovered, she sort of kind of commits suicide. um, she throws herself into the pit she had prepared and was consumed, and everyone else lived happily ever after. That's how this original tale ends. Yeah. It's so strange. I thought that out of all the ones, at first I thought out of all the ones that I did, I thought Snow White was probably going to be the most odd or out there, or maybe Pinocchio even. But this just takes the cake. I mean, it's just so weird that they have ogres suddenly, and, you know, suddenly make this other story attached to it that I don't even know really needs to necessarily be there. It's almost like these fairy tale writers really do try to push logic. I think they really, really do try to set the bar as far as with logic is concerned. And basically what you need to understand is the Disney version does not include any of this. It just ends with Maleficent being defeated and Aurora being awoken and everybody being awoken and celebrating. Similar to how the first part of the original tale ends. Doesn't go any further than that. And I just think the reason why I find this so odd and out there is just because the stories don't really feel like they really go together. Like you could scrap the other second part of this, and it wouldn't really change so much. But I think that they were just sort of experimenting with these writers were probably just really experimenting with a lot of this stuff. And Sleeping Beauty just happened to be one of those little projects. And for the most part, it does have some key differences, or key similarities, like the gifts, the fairies, and certain things. I just think the way it executes itself is rather different than how the original, or than how the Disney version decides to put things together. It is rather strange that they would have these two parts, and that they decided that the person, meaning Charles Perrault, decided to somehow mix these two together and feel like that they have some sort of cohesion. I don't know if he was trying to hint at the possibility of the old fairy somehow being the ogress. I don't know if that was maybe the idea behind that. It could be possible. And I'm not sure if this fairy tale actually sort of inspired a lot of what happens in Shrek. Like, if you read Shrek's tale and you look at this, yeah, it does have differences. Really major differences, but these whole concepts of throwing the ogres and this fairy tale-esque type story together, it seems like that wasn't really an original idea. It's just Shrek took those ideas and sort of tried to make it comedical, and try to make sort of fun of fairy tales, which I do like Shrek. I mean, I think it is funny. I think I agree with Doug that I do kind of prefer the sequel than the original. I don't know if that's maybe just me, but I still find myself enjoying the first two. I haven't seen the third one in a while, so I really don't know. I've heard a lot of people say really bad stuff about the third one. Did not see the fourth one, so I don't know. But for the most part, it does seem like, for what Disney did with this, even though it can be maybe a mess at times, I think it still does a good job of maintaining its adaptation. And this one is just kind of it's an interesting fairy tale because they do bring up all of these random things that you feel like wouldn't be there, and you can either get sucked into the world or you can get sucked out of it because of the logic. And I think the only logical thing that bothered me was just the fact that the king and queen are just, they don't decide to put them in there, or he didn't decide to put them in there and have them sleep. which I don't understand, which the Disney version clearly cleared up. And again, the Disney version with Maleficent's motivations are somewhat weak. But again, this version I don't think really does it in such a way that it's better. But I just think it's a little bit more explained. But again, it could be it could be a dealing of preferences. I mean, I think a lot of people really do like Maleficent. I think a lot of people do really think she's really cool, even though her motivation isn't really that strong. I personally feel she's a little bit overrated just because I just like villains with motivations, and when you have such a weak motivation, it's hard for me to go, okay, I really am invested in why you want to really ruin this family and, just and mess stuff up. It doesn't really get me invested in that aspect because just of her motivation. And to get snubbed by a party. I mean, and again, this is a similar motivation. She is getting snubbed, but they do at least try to sort of explain, and it's sort of more logical, I think, in that respect, because they make her a fairy. But in the Disney version, it's clear that Maleficent is not a fairy at all. I mean, she doesn't even look like a fairy. And she's just kind of this sort of witch, and mistress of all evil, as she so claims. But I really think that's really all I can say. I mean, it really comes down to, I think, whether or not you feel sort of the logics kind of are more pulled from this original tale, or if you feel they're more pulled from the Disney version. But I think that even though the original tale does kind of have some stuff going for it, I think overall it seems like a lot of the stuff that I've been looking at, it seems like either the fairy tales are on par with the Disney version, or I think the Disney version kind of outdoes this. And from what I've read, I feel like even though Aurora is probably one of the weakest Disney princesses, at least she kind of, I don't know, gets more lines. And I guess they try to make her a little bit more interesting, but again, that interest does not really hold up in the film so much. But compared to the original tale, I feel like, hey, at least she sings nicely. And because she was played by her voice actor was an opera singer, so. And in here, she only just gets a couple of lines, and it's just basically just setting her up for her downfall. And then when you get into this sort of second act, she's just sort of hopeless, and at the same time, though, she does seem to be a little bit caring. But again, this tale is just so short. It's literally only like 7 pages. But I think the morals are there, the ideas are there in both versions, and I think, yeah, that's really all I can say. Any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time, bye-bye, everybody.